Getting a perfect exposure consistently doesn't need to be complicated. And if you do end up ruining your exposure, you will ruin your photo as a result as well. And if you're anything like me, you don't want to ruin your otherwise great photos with a bad exposure. Hi, I'm Hugo. I travel and photograph the world full time, and I help other photographers transform their photos. This is where I was with my photos about 8 years ago, and now I take photos like this, this, and this. In this video I'll go through how do I consistently get great exposures and how you can too. Before that though, I get asked all the time what gear do I use to make my photos. So if you also want to find that out, then get my free photography toolkit from the link in the description. Alright, so in the past I've definitely ruined some great photos due to my inability to make a proper exposure. Sometimes you can save a bad exposure in post-production, but sometimes the exposure is that bad that you can't do anything about it. The 3 tips I give you today on how to get perfect exposures are very simple, but effective. If you're anything like me, you don't want to make camera settings any more complicated than they need to be. Photography, after all, is not about settings. It's about understanding how to communicate the story in front of you in a proper way. And settings is a very small part of this. So let's get into the 3 things so you can make the best photos possible. Tip 1. Do not rely on your camera screen for a proper exposure. Relying on a camera screen for exposures are the main things why people ruin their exposure in the first place. A screen behind the camera just isn't an accurate way to understand is a photo properly exposed. Sometimes the screen is brighter than what the photo is actually gonna be, and sometimes it shows it as a darker than what the photo is gonna turn out like. Do not look at the screen. Instead use tip number 2 that I'm gonna go into in a bit. Use that to make then great exposures. But if you do have a Sony camera, make sure to turn off this setting called DRO, Auto HDR. What this does is it brightens your photo preview kind of for when shooting in RAW. So what this means is that if you do rely on the screen, then it gives you a false representation of how bright your photograph is when you're taking it. And if you have no clue what histogram is, this is histogram. And how this works is more simple than it looks like. So on the left side you have the blacks, on the right side you have the brights, and then in the middle you have kind of everything else. So what this means is that if your photo's histogram looks like this, so basically everything is to the left, your photo is underexposed. There are mostly darker areas in your photo compared to brighter areas. And if your photo looks like this, so mostly everything is to the right side of the photo, that means there isn't really much dark areas going on, it's mostly just bright. And that means that it is too bright. Alright, so you want to make sure that there is nothing showing up in this part of the histogram, like absolutely hitting the left wall of the histogram, because that means that then there are areas in the photo that are that dark. There is no detail anymore in these areas. The same thing if you have something showing up in this part of the histogram on the right side, so like absolutely hitting the right wall, then it means it's that bright that there is no detail and you have ruined the exposure. What I do when I expose for my photos, I do expose to the right. So I have the photo as bright as possible without it hitting the right wall, so to say. So I make sure that nothing is hitting the right wall, and that's how I get the best exposures possible. So histogram is something you can get visible indeed on your camera itself. So what you can do is when you do have it up on your screen, Then you can adjust settings like aperture, shutter speed, ISO and so on. And you can see how the exposure changes in the histogram, not relying on the screen. And then you will see if something is off in the exposure, and if something is off, then you can fix it. You can also see the histogram after you've taken the photo, so you can still double check the exposure is okay. Alright, before we get into the tip number 3, one quick thing. If this is making sense so far and you are starting to realize how much better your photos could be with the right approach, you will love the Storylines, my photography mentorship program. In it, I will help you transform your photos so that you can be proud of your photos. You can make others feel something when watching your photos, and that you can be confident in sharing your photos. If you're ready to take the next step, then join the waitlist to my mentorship down below in the description. Alright, so now you know 2 of the 3 things how to get best exposures possible. So don't rely on the screen, rely on histogram, and then this 3rd one is to use bracketing if needed. This simply meaning that take multiple exposures of the same scene and then smash them together in post-production. So there's 2 ways to do this. One is that there might be some setting in your camera that will automatically take you 3 different photos. So one that is like kind of underexposed, then probably exposed, and then overexposed. And overexposed meaning that some part of the photo is overexposed. And then you can take these photos in Lightroom or other alternative software, and you can make these into an HDR photo. And now you have much more room to play around in post, and you can make sure that nothing is overexposed or then underexposed. So that's the first way to do this. So let your camera take the 3 or so different photos. I never have done that though, personally. How I do it is I just do it manually. So I take first a photo that is as well exposed as possible, and then I take a photo that is underexposed so that I won't overexpose some bright areas of the photo. Then I will take one other photo that is overexposing some of the parts in the photo, but now it's getting the detail in the dark areas. And then I simply import this into Lightroom. I select the 3 photos and I make them into an HDR image, and then I edit that photograph, and then I have a proper exposure. So use this as well when needed. I most often don't use this, but there's some scenes where I use it. So it could be like a sunset if I'm especially shooting into the sun, or then some trickier scenes could be like a forest scene, or then some other difficult lighting scenarios. But don't use this if you don't need it, because it just makes your photography process more complicated and less enjoyable. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, the chances are that you also enjoy this video. So watch it now.